So let's talk about UV unwrapping the ground poly elements that we've created so far. On screen we've got here our basic base asphalt poly, and you can also see to the bottom right of the screen the markings lines that we've created, and we've actually got, although it's hard to see here, the edge profile as well for our poly. We're going to do two different things here because there are two techniques required. One technique is going to be just a basic project from view for our overall poly, and then we're going to do some follow active quad mapping, which is a really handy technique for our lines and our poly edges. So first thing I think I want to do is I'm going to set up a material right quick. Let me choose my poly and put a new material and just call it asphalt base. I like to turn up my diffuse intensity and down my specular every time I create a new material here. And we're going to choose a texture that I've put in my folder here called asphalt base, strangely enough. Alright, so with that, let's go into edit mode here on our poly. And as you'll recall, this is like a serious ingon in that there are lots and lots of vertices for each one of these edges in here. And ordinarily, you want to avoid ingons, especially like crazy ingons like these when you're modeling. But this is one of those rare cases where they're actually perfectly fine. You need all those vertices to get the detail you want, but you don't necessarily need to connect them all with edges. And that is because we're going to use a special mapping technique called project, hit the U key here, project from view. Let me turn on my screencast keys as well here so we can see what I'm doing. Alright, and what that does basically is if I pull over my UV image editor, provided I am in the top ortho mode where my poly is perfectly flat and perfectly sort of parallel to my view here, project from view just automatically maps that as if it were just projecting an image straight down onto it. And that means we can then choose our asphalt base here that we've applied and begin to scale things so that it looks about right. Alright, I've got two monitors here. The video is only happening on one, obviously, so you won't see what I'm doing. All I'm doing basically is scaling the UVs. I'm just going to keep scaling them up until I feel like I've got about the right scale on this asphalt texture. Remember, this texture is just here to provide some detail when you're up close. It is not the repetition you're seeing here, which is pretty obvious, not going to be a big deal in the final because of the overlays that go over it. But as far as a mapping technique, is really all that's required for this is to do the project from view and then get it scaled. So that is our asphalt base poly, no problem there. And now we're going to go into a technique called follow active quads. I'm going to choose my edge of the poly here. And the idea behind the material we're creating is I want to basically hide the hard edge of the poly down below. So I'm trying to hide this hard line by overlaying something that isn't so hard and looks more organic and kind of more realistic in terms of the edge of a piece of asphalt. You know, there would be some cracking and some splitting and that sort of thing. And the technique I've come up with is essentially to have a long texture that maps along here that covers the hard edge here and goes right about up to here and then fades out. Uses an alpha fade so that it fades into our asphalt texture. And then on this side is broken up pretty quickly so you can see the ground beneath it. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's make a new texture here right quick. A new material, we're going to call it asphalt edge. Up and down. And then I'm going to apply this asphalt edge texture that I've made. Now this is a different sort of texture than anything we've used before in that it is not square, for one thing. Let me get up close to it so you can see it. It is a long texture. I think it is 2048 wide, and it's only about I think 64 pixels high, or maybe 128 high. The idea being we don't need the height. We're going to map this just sort of snake-like all along the edge of our poly, but we would like to have a lot of variation so that it doesn't repeat so obviously in the horizontal axis. So that's why I made it so long. And as long as they're both power of 2, you can get away with a rectangular texture like this, but they do have to be obviously power of 2 for any game engine. So you can see here the checkered areas are the transparent ones. The actual edge of our poly is going to land right in the middle here, and everywhere there's an actual hard edge, you'll see we've got a texture overlaying that so you don't see it. And then this is the edge on the ground side, and this is the fade out that'll be on the asphalt side of our poly. So taking that back in here, what we want to do is in edit mode we want to go to face select, and I'm just going to choose the first polygon in our line here, and I'm going to hit U, unwrap, and what that is going to give us is this long UV shell here. There is one important step that we have to do before doing any kind of active quad unwrapping, and that is that we really want our UV shell to be square on all edges. So you can see right here that this edge is sort of canted inward just a little bit at the bottom. There are two ways that you can quickly square this up. One of them is just the default way. I'm going to go into edge select mode in my UV editor, and I'm going to select this edge and hit the W key and choose Align X, and that is going to square it up on the x-axis. And then you can do the same thing for the y's. These are already aligned pretty well, but you could do that as well. And once you've gotten a UV shell, a UV island that has got right angles on all four corners, then you're ready to, I'm going to do a little scaling here right quick. Scale it down just a little. I don't like it butting right up to the edge of my texture. So I'm just going to scale it down a little bit so there's a little bit of texture top and bottom. That allows for the bitmaps to come in without bleeding over into our image. Alright, and then I'm going to go back to this mode here. Go back to our edit mode, and I'm going to select all, and making sure that the active poly in the selection, the active polygon, is the one that we just did the mapping on. I'm going to hit the U key, and I'm going to use follow active quads, length average is fine, and hit OK. And what that does is it unwraps the entire line proportionally using whatever, using the scale and the sizing and the position that we set up for that first active poly. And you can see if you come over into here. Now one thing has happened that happens a lot when you're doing these edges, and that is that it's reversed. This is actually supposed to be the part that fades, that's on the ground side, and this is the edge that fades away into our asphalt here. So I'm going to go over here to the UV image editor. Just going to hit R and 180 to rotate it 180 degrees, and we're in business. And because this the first poly we selected here was scaled and sized appropriately, all the other ones are going to be scaled as well. And basically your line is going to look good all the way along its length. Let me turn on the transparency. It'll be a little easier to see. So this material should have transparency. There we go. Although it doesn't work so well when you don't have the object selected. But now you can kind of see our end goal here, which is to create a more natural edge along our asphalt. And you can do an edge that works for concrete as well. This one happens to be designed for asphalt. Alright, so that's the base poly and the edge. And then the taxiway markings, here our lines, are going to use that same technique we used for the edge. So again, I'm going to go in here into edit mode. I'm going to select my first poly and hit unwrap. That is going to give me this. And the other way you can square these edges up on your poly is by using the Text Tools, TEX Tools add-on for Blender. And there's one for 2.79. There's actually a new version that works with 2.80 and above as well. Super handy add-on. I just discovered it recently. And it has, one of its many handy functions is the ability to rectify a face. So I'm just going to select this face here and click rectify, and it automatically made all 4 of our corners right angles. So that's already done. We don't have to worry about it. Now I know for sure, let's see, let me go back over here and choose my texture. So I'm going to make this material. I'm going to call it GP markings. And then I'm going to go over here to my textures, hit new, open, choose my PDX, GP markings. Here we go. All right. I also want to turn on transparency for that as well. And now, if I go to my UV editor again, I can turn on the GP markings. Alright, so here are the markings that I'm going to be using for my line. Now I want to use this yellow line, and clearly this is oriented the wrong way, so let's rotate it by 90 degrees and grab it and put it over where it needs to be. And just using this one poly, we're going to get everything scaled and sized and positioned right where it needs to be first, and then the rest of the line will come along easily. Scale it down. Alright, so I'm going to get that about right in the middle of the marking. Doesn't matter top to bottom where it is. And then, and you can see it right here, all set up the way it needs to be. We're going to do select all. We're going to make sure that our first poly here is still the one that's active. Hit follow active quads, length average, and just like that, once we select our texture, oops, always does that, we have a line. And no matter how long that line is, no matter how many faces it has, they'll all be mapped out perfectly and they'll all look great using this follow active quad technique, the same one as for the edge. So really, other than that, the only other areas you'll be mapping are the whole short lines or the runway number blocks, and that's just basic UV mapping. There's nothing special to that. Same technique you'd use for unwrapping and mapping anything. So that's how to get everything UV unwrapped.